Today, let's continue our conversation about due diligence for self-storage facilities. My name's Mark Helm, and I'm the author of Creating Wealth Through Self-Storage, and I'm the creator of the Self-Storage Quick Start Academy. And what I do is I support the small investor who wants to get in the self-storage business or who wants to grow their self-storage business, strategically do so in a way that creates true wealth and a fulfilling career. More about what we offer, including the on-demand self-storage Quick Start Academy Bootcamp, which takes a person from wherever you are all the way through putting your first self-storage project into service. You can find out more about it at creatingwealththroughselfstorage.com or quickstartacademy.com. And so far, we've had 3 episodes in this due diligence series. Now, the boot camp goes into a lot of detail, but what we talked about in episode 1 of the series is how to create a timeline and what to get from the seller. In step 2, we talked about the physical inspections and how to deal with third-party vendors that will be involved in the due diligence process. Step 3, we talked about the financial records and operational review. Now today what I'd like to do is layer on top of that if you're doing an expansion. You can link to the previous episodes, or you can go to creatingwealththroughselfstorage.com and start with episode 289. And again, as an overview, what we're finding out as small investors in today's world, we need to really do some value add plays in order to get the type of returns that we need as small investors. It's hard for people like us to go in and buy an existing storage facility at a 5 cap or a 6 cap and have it work and be worth the time, energy, and risk we've got to take in order to do that type of deal. So what we're finding is the value add plays that make the most sense, that create the most returns, are expansions and conversions. This week we'll talk about expansions, the due diligence process of expansions. Next week we'll talk about conversions. So you start with everything we've talked about because you're buying an existing facility. Everything we've covered in episodes 289 up to this point, you've got to do. Plus, you've got to do what we're going to talk about today. Now, I don't have a construction background, and I'm going to approach it in a very simple way. So up until this point, we have made an assumption. Usually, like today, if I was doing an assumption on an expansion, let's say I'm buying 25,000 square feet, I'm adding another 25,000 square feet of that additional, I'm adding 70% is non-climate control, 30% of it's climate control. I've thrown in a per square foot number of, let's say, $55. That's the number I would use today. And this is being recorded as of May 2021. And that's what I'd use for the hard cost and soft costs, not including the land, which was included in the purchase price of the facility. That's the number I would use today in my preliminary analysis. Now I know you can build them for less, you can also build them for more, but if we're doing drive up, single story, given steel prices, construction costs, that's the number I'd use today. Now in the due diligence process, I've got to get closer to what that real number is going to be. So in my simple way, I'm looking at the expansion portion in like 3 parts. Part 1 is the approval process. What's involved in that? How much does it cost? Part 2 is the land process, getting the land ready to build on. What's involved in that? How much does that cost? And then the third component is construction itself. So I'm going to break them down into kind of 3 main areas, at least for our conversation today. But in my mind, trying to keep things simple. That's how I relate to it. Now, you have some choices as a small investor. You could hire a general contractor to handle all the construction, or you can be the GC. We typically kind of go somewhere in the middle, simply because self-storage is not that complicated a product. We typically will hire a construction manager, but I want to be involved in most of the major decisions. I want to be involved in what products go in the project, and I play. So we hire a construction manager. In our world, we pay our construction manager a percentage, usually 3 to 5%, and it's based on a construction budget that we both agree on. But if you have known nothing about construction, have never done anything at all in the real estate world, a GC is a real valid option. Typically you pay a little bit more, but they will handle a lot of the logistics. They'll come back to you in the due diligence process with a number. So let's talk about the approval process. We rely heavily on our civil engineers to drive the approval process. In other asset types like apartments, multifamily, retail, usually the architect plays a much more critical role. For us, we use the civil engineers. In the preliminary, where we're in the conversation we had about the third-party vendors 2 episodes ago, if we're doing an expansion, one of the third-party vendors that we locate between letter of intent and contract is a civil engineer. We're looking for an engineer who hopefully knows something about self-storage, knows what's involved in getting approvals in whatever municipality you're in, and can help drive the approval process, knows who the players are that are going to approve it, knows what the process is. And we ask him, because usually on an expansion, you're already zoned. Why? Well, because there's already existing self-storage there. You're just adding more self-storage. I want to get from the civil, how hard a process is it? How long is it going to take? What's involved? Are there any chances they could say no? Most of the markets where we're at, if we're doing an expansion, it's just a matter of getting the approvals and then pulling the site disturbance permit and the building permit. Rarely do we have to go through a long, arduous approval process for an expansion. We're typically in markets that are pretty development friendly, or we try to be. Now, given the short time frame today in the self-storage world, odds are, and I've never been able to do it, we're not going to have all of our approvals for the expansion before the closing. I'm really leaning heavy on the engineer to know what my risks are, if I'm going to have any challenges. If it looks like it's not going to be able to work, or it's 50-50 whether I'd get the approval, I've never had that case, but if it did, I probably wouldn't close on it unless I could extend it out. In most cases, the engineers say, yeah, there's a few hoops to jump through, but you'll get your approval process. Here are the hoops, and here are the challenges, and I'm pretty clear we can do it. If that's the case, I'll go, as long as I have a lot of my construction numbers, not all of them, but enough of them to know what the range of what it's going to be, I will go on and close on the deal. Early on, I will ask my engineer, what's your cost? How involved do I have to have an architect for approvals? Usually we only use the architect, if possible, for just creating renderings for approval. Sometimes if we're redoing the office, I'll get the architect involved a little bit on that. And the other role an architect may play for us in expansions is, once I get my building plans from the fabricator, if we've got to layer on other things like electrical and plumbing in order to pull the building permit, then I will, usually an architect will play that role. I'll get the CAD of the building plans from the self-storage fabricator, and then the architect will add on whatever else is necessary and sign off in order to get the building permit. I try to relegate the architect's role to a very minor role in expansions. For us, it's mostly engineer driven. And then I'll finally get from the engineer what are the soft costs. What's the approval process? What are you going to charge me? What do you think I'll pay in surveys and geotech? So let's talk about the land. The next thing is the civil is in charge of this too, because the civil, once I get the feasibility report back and it shows that there's excess demand for self-storage, the civil engineer is going to take the preliminary drawing that we get from the storage fabricator. And usually if I don't have that before the letter of intent is signed, I definitely ask the storage fabricators to generate a preliminary drawing. We'll tweak it a little bit, and then I pay for that preliminary drawing with the fabricators of the storage system, and then I will get a bid from them on what they've drawn, but I'll take that same plan and give it to 2 or 3 others because I paid for it, I own it, and I can get other people to bid on it, and I don't feel like I've taken advantage of anyone. So I'll be getting 2 or 3 bids from storage fabricators, but I give that preliminary drawing to the engineer. The engineer will tweak it, usually sometimes, for setbacks and truck turnarounds and a few other things that deal specifically with that site. But that engineer is going to take that preliminary drawing. This is what we want on that site, or something close, and then he'll design his site work drawings for the site work excavators to bid on around that preliminary plan. My experience is the wild card number in all of self-storage construction is the site work. I paid up to $1 million in site work on a 5-acre site, and I paid as little as $13,000 on a half-acre site. So it's the wild card in there. But I want to get that process going as soon as I can. Usually we pull the trigger on the site work drawings the moment I approve that feasibility report. I have everything lined up and ready to go. And the moment I get that report back, it looks good, we turn that engineer loose. Now, assuming we're building single-story self-storage construction, which is mostly what we do on expansions, because mostly we're buying mom-and-pop type facilities to expand, not always, but mostly. The biggest number is going to be the storage system itself. So I've started that process early. I've started that process back with the letter of intent phase. I got my preliminary drawing, and then the second we're getting bids all through while the feasibility report's done and the inspection time is being done. We're getting bids from other fabricators. Once we get a final plan, whoever we select, we'll give that plan to them. They'll tweak their bid if they need to. Usually it's not much. You'll have a choice, mostly. Your choice will be, do you want that self-storage fabricator, let's say Bedco or Track-T or Mayco? There's a lot of them out there, but those are some of the larger ones. They can either erect it for you, or you can contract directly with the erector. We usually do the latter. I will contract, it saves me a little money. I'll sign a contract with an approved erector for that system, like I'm not the first one that's ever put that system up, but I'll contract with the fabricator for the system. I'll contract with the erector to put it up, and the other kind of big number is the concrete. And usually the self-storage fabricators will give the concrete specs in the building plans. I make sure the engineer has that, and I make sure that my construction manager has that. And we use local contractors to bid on doing the concrete pours based on the specs from the fabricator. So those are my big numbers: the erection of the building itself, and the concrete. The other numbers, the other trades, the electrical, the plumbing, the security, the fencing company, can all be local contractors. We lean heavily on our construction managers for those local contacts, and we use our construction manager in the construction process to be on site daily and make sure that the trades show up when they're supposed to. I want to be very involved in the larger number things. I also want to help pick the electrician. That can be a real number, but I'm real focused on the big ticket items: site work, contractor to put up the system itself, and usually our construction manager manages the other trades. That's just how we do it. If you're using a general contractor, they will handle the whole process from the approval all the way down. Overall, this is a real high view. In the boot camp we go into more detail, but this is a real high view of how we handle during the due diligence phase the extra steps that are involved in an expansion. Ultimately, here's the goal, is you've got 30 or 45 days. You want as many numbers coming in. Now, they may not be contract numbers from an electrician, or they may not be the final contract from the erector, but the erector's going to look at your building plan and say, I'm going to charge $4.50 a foot to erect that. Now, it may tweak a little bit because your plan tweaks, but you have a close enough number to know what your erection costs are going to be. You'll have a close enough number to know what your system costs are going to be. Hopefully you'll have some site work bids coming in by the end of that time period. And the other trades will be bidding on it. You might not have your exact final number, but you'll be close enough that you can take that per square foot $55 number and translate that into a much closer construction number based on the numbers you're getting in from the engineer, from the steel fabricators, from the erectors, from the concrete site work people. You'll be close enough to know if this deal's going to work for you or not, even if you don't have all your numbers. At the end of the due diligence period, with whatever information we have, we look at our pro forma, because we've been updating it as we go, and we say, does this still meet our benchmark numbers for our business strategy to put this investment into service? If it does, we move on. We try not to do a due diligence extension based on our construction. If we have to, we will. Usually we pay for that. Usually we have to let our security deposit become non-refundable to buy more time. Sometimes we even have to put up more non-refundable money. If we're confident from the information we have that the deal's going to work, if we're confident that we've got the financing in place and it looks like the deal's going to work, we'll weigh the risk. We usually put the money up. I'm not advising you to do that, but I'm just telling you what we do. You make your own decisions. But we will put money at risk if the deal still looks like it's doable. This is where the relationships with the brokers are so important, because if you have a good relationship with that broker, no seller wants to extend a due diligence period, but if they're confident that you can close, and they're going to get that from the broker in most cases, and they get that extending a little bit of time with you will still close faster than letting you go and starting all over again in the due diligence period with somebody else, very often they'll do it, especially if they feel protected with that we put some money where our mouth is. So that's how we relate to extending due diligence if we need to. Just remember, you're doing all this due diligence stuff simultaneously in today's world. You're doing your inspections, feasibility report, due diligence on the expansion, and financing all at the same time. Hopefully you're not having to raise capital, but believe me, I've done that too. But this is the world we find ourselves in, and rather than lament about all the stuff we've got to do, We try to be the people who will do the stuff to create the returns that self-storage offers us in today's world. I hope this has helped you as you start thinking about or going through the due diligence process on an expansion. Expansions are fantastic ways to get in or grow your self-storage business today, because they can take a 6-cap property and turn it into something that has created $800,000 to $1 million worth of value in a couple years and be giving you double-digit cash-on-cash returns. At least that's been our experience. So anyway, I look forward to being with you next week as we explore conversions in the due diligence process, which is different in many ways to what we just talked about today. I look forward to being with you next week as we continue in this due diligence series. I'll see you then.